What is Atomic Red Team? Atomic Red Team is a framework for emulating hacker techniques that can be used to measure, monitor, and improve your information security controls. By the end of this introductory video, you'll understand Atomic Red Team in greater detail and can use this information to decide if adopting this framework would be beneficial to you or your organization. Atomic Red Team is integrated with MITRE Attack framework, so we'll start off with a quick introduction to MITRE Attack before we move into greater details about Atomic Red Team itself. So let's take a look at the MITRE Attack framework. So if we do a search for MITRE Attack, we can click on this and we can get some great information about what the MITRE Attack is. It's a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world observations. So these are observations that have been taken in the real world. These techniques and tactics are things that people have seen in the real world in attacks against their networks. So let's look at the matrix to see what we have. We've got in the gray bar at the top, we have all of the different tactics that they have lumped the techniques under and categorized them. So if we want to get some more information about these different tactics, we can click on this. We can see the initial access, what it is. It's the adversary trying to get into your network. And then we can see the different techniques again and descriptions about all of these different techniques about what the tactic is. So we can look through these. The execution is trying to run malicious code on the network. We can get persistence. The adversary is trying to maintain their foothold, so if you catch them, they don't want to lose their access, so they'll try to keep that access. If we look at defensive evasion, they are trying to avoid being detected, so obviously they don't want to get caught. So these are some of the things that they do to avoid being caught. And we can again look through the different techniques under each of these tactics. And let's take a look at some of these things down here. Let's look at the disabling security tools. This is T1089. We can read what this is. Adversaries may disable security tools to avoid possible detection of their tools. And again, at the procedure examples, we can see the different attacks that have happened and the different things that are going on with this technique. If we look back up at the top, we can see the ID number again is T1089. Now this is an important number to take note of because this is what relates exactly to the Atomic Red Team. So we'll get a little bit more of that later. But if we want to run some of the procedures that attackers use, MITRE Attack doesn't give us very much information about that. So that's one of the things that Atomic Red Team does, is has these procedures to run some of the attacks against your own network to see if you can detect them. So let's take a look now at the Atomic Red Team. Let's see if we can find it. Atomic Red Team GitHub. So here, Atomic Red Team is on GitHub, which makes it easy for the community in general. So we can see here we have some folders and some files. There's a couple of folders that are probably the most important for us to look at. One is the atomics and the other is the execution frameworks. So let's take a look at the atomics. So again, we see here we have all of the T numbers. These are the different techniques that the MITRE Attack framework has identified. And again, we're going to go back to this T1089 that we identified earlier. And we see that there's two files. Now these two files, one is a markdown file and the other one is a YAML file, yet another markup language. And the YAML file is machine code. It's a great way to tell the machines what to do. It's not very human readable, and so it's not as easy to read as a markdown language. So we have the markdown language that kind of describes what is going to be in the YAML file. Now when we open up this markdown file, We can see here we have T1089 disabling security tools. Again, we have the description. This comes exactly from the MITRE Attack framework. Adversaries may disable security tools to avoid possible detection of their tools and activities. So here we have some of the tests that are here to test your network to see if you can detect or to see if these processes are allowed on your network. These first ones are mainly for Linux, but let's look at some of these ones that might be for Windows. So uninstall sysmon. So sysmon is the system monitor to check that checks for endpoint things that are running on the endpoint. If we want to try and uninstall that, we can just type in sysmon-u. Before we get there, let's go through some of this test. We can see here that this supported platform is for Windows. We can see that the inputs, we have sysmon.exe, the description of that, the path, and the default value. Again, this command will run with the command prompt, but we do need an elevated command prompt. We need root or admin privileges. So again, what we would run on the command prompt is the sysmon-u, and if that is allowed, sysmon would be uninstalled. You can also, when you run this, when you run sysmon-u, you would also check to see if that is allowed, first of all, and check to see if your endpoint protections would detect that and alert on it. Because again, this is something that an attacker would do to see if they can disable this sysmon monitor. Some of these other things, let's scroll down a little bit. Disable arbitrary security Windows service. So again, with administrative rights, we can disable Windows services related to security products. Again, let's look at the command now. So this is going to stop this service. What is the service? We can see here that we have a hashtag with the curly braces. This is the variable of service name. Now the service name variable is up here. This is the description of the service to stop, and we have the default value. Here it's McAfee DLP agent service. So if we have that on our environment, we could just run this command and it would stop this service. However, if we have something else, we could change this variable name to stop whatever service we wanted to check. Again, this would check to see, one, if it's allowed, and two, if your endpoint protection responses would alert on it. You can imagine that going through and looking at all of these atomic tests and copying and pasting out each one of these commands could get a little bit tedious. So this is, again, where Atomic Red Team comes into play. So let's go back to the main Atomic Red Team folder. And let's look at the execution frameworks. So here we have the Atomic Red Team execution frameworks. There's three different ways to execute Atomic Red Team. The most developed is the PowerShell invoke Atomic Red Team. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to click on the repository, and it's going to take us to the invoke Atomic Red Team PowerShell. We have here the description of what it is. We can click on the wiki up here, and the wiki is going to tell us a little bit more about it. So this wiki has information about how to install it and all of that type of information, but let's just look at executing this atomic tests. So let's take a look here at the invoke atomic tests. So if we wanted to invoke the atomic test T1117, did I say that right? We could just type in invoke atomic test and then this script, and it would run test numbers 1 and 2. So you can imagine that if we wanted to run multiple tests, this is going to be a lot easier than copying and pasting in all of those different types of commands. Again, it will break out running a command or running on a PowerShell, and it makes the running of the tests a lot easier than copying and pasting all of those commands that we saw. Now, how many of these tactics are covered with Atomic Red Team? So let's go to the Atomic Red Team page. If we go back to the atomics, we can see all the T numbers here, and we can go down to the bottom and we can see these index files. There's index for Linux and Mac OS and Windows. Well, let's just look at the main index, and we can see here that for persistence we can see all of the different tests that have been created. For T1156 we have 2 tests. For T1015 we've got 1 test. So we can see all of these different tests that have been created for the different tactics that MITRE Attack has identified. This is a little bit overwhelming to look at because there's just so many things to see, and you can see that some of them don't quite have a test written for them yet. So to get a better view of how many of these tactics have a test written for them, we can look up the MITRE Attack Navigator. So let's take a look at the MITRE Attack Navigator. I'm going to do a search for MITRE Attack Navigator, maybe, and we can see if we go past the ads, we're going to click on the Navigator. So this is a visual representation of the MITRE Attack matrix, and we can see all of the different tactics and techniques here, and this is a great visual way to see different aspects of the MITRE Attack framework. And so what this also does is it allows us to overlay this with layers so that we can again get a different visualization of the MITRE Attack. So we're going to overlay this with the tactics and techniques from the Atomic Red Team. So I'm going to again do a search for Atomic Red Team, and I'm going to go into the atomics, and if I scroll down to the bottom again by the indexes, I'm going to see here that there's a Art Navigator layer. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to look at the raw data, and I'm going to grab this URL here. Now I'm going to combine these two URLs to overlay the Atomic Red Team onto the MITRE Attack Navigator. So I'm going to put this on here, except I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to put on my URL that I just got. So when I do this, I should get an overlay of red. Let's see why this isn't loading. There we go. Okay, so now I can see that this MITRE Attack Navigator is overlaid with these red boxes. What the red boxes mean is that there is a test for detecting one of these techniques that has been identified in the MITRE Attack framework. So if Atomic Red Team has a test that is used to detect one of these techniques, then it is highlighted in red. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that every single option of executing one of these techniques is going to be found. It just means that there's one test that is done for each one of these techniques. Now again, you can see that there's quite a bit of overlay, and Atomic Red Team has quite a bit of coverage for this. Again, I'm going to change the output so we can see it maybe a little bit better. So if I click up here, I can see that there's quite a bit of red overlaying the boxes. Each one of these boxes represents a different technique that it's identified by the MITRE Attack. And again, The red means that there's a test to detect one of those techniques. So you can see that there's quite a bit of coverage using this. And again, this is MITRE or Atomic Red Team is a public project. You're welcome to continue to add to it and continue to add to the detections for these techniques out there. It's a great tool, very useful, and something that I hope that you can use. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to Atomic Red Team and have learned how this might be valuable for you to use in your environment to measure, monitor, and improve your detections.